Modules 14 and 15 are going to be all about inflation. 14 will talk about what inflation is and how it affects spending and interest rates, as well as the different types of inflation. And then 15 will get into measurement of inflation. When you think of inflation in America, it's not a major problem that we deal with. Prices go up a little bit each year, but normally this is not something that's going to drastically impact what you buy and decisions that you make. Now, this isn't always true. Zimbabwe experienced something called hyperinflation. This is an extremely high inflation rate. They experienced annual inflation of 79.6 billion%. To put that into perspective, in America, our normal inflation rate is 1 to 3%. So prices were doubling in Zimbabwe about once every single day. So imagine if everything you bought doubled tomorrow and then doubled the next day and continued doubling. That's this inflationary spiral that was going out of control. They started printing higher and higher and higher denomination bills to keep up with this. So we have a $50 million bill. And by the way, dollar is a name for a currency in lots of countries. There's Canadian dollars, there's American dollars. So you can see that Zimbabwe had dollars. So when we learn about foreign trade later on, ours are called the US dollar or USD. So just FYI, there's lots of dollars out there. Anyway, so later on, as this inflation is spiraling, you can see 3 eggs were worth $100 billion. And then finally, they had to print a $100 trillion bill. So you can imagine if inflation was that high, your savings account's going to be wiped clean pretty quickly. So people had nothing in the bank left over, and it's going to be harder for wages to catch up to these rising prices. You're not going to be getting a raise or doubling your paycheck every single day. So you can imagine how this is going to be extremely painful. The people in Zimbabwe ended up completely ending the use of their currency, and they would either switch to using a foreign currency that was more stable or bartering, trading goods back and forth once they realized that their Zimbabwean dollars became, in essence, worthless with this hyperinflation. Now that you've seen what hyperinflation or extreme inflation looks like, let's talk about normal inflation. Inflation is defined as a rise in the overall price levels. And this word levels is really important. There is a big difference between the price of a single product going up and all price levels going up. Just because smartphones cost a lot of money, or just because the price of gas went up, that doesn't tell us that we have inflation. We need to look economy-wide and see in general what's happening to price levels, what is the average that they are going up, and then we can find out the inflation rate. The other really key part of inflation is this idea of purchasing power. Purchasing power is how much your money buys. So a $1 bill in 1940 and a $1 bill now. Do they have the same purchasing power? Can they buy the same amount of stuff? No, because we've had slow inflation in those decades since then. So when your income rises slower than the price level, so if your income isn't keeping up with inflation and the cost of goods in the economy, then the purchasing power decreases. The value of your dollar is decreasing if everything costs less. So more inflation equals a decline in purchasing power. So we're just trying to hit on the relationship between these terms. When price levels go up, purchasing power goes down. And here's another visual talking about money. An individual dollar, $1 in 1961, bought approximately what $5 purchased in 2014. So as price levels go up, the purchasing power of money falls. You might have seen old movies or heard about, coffee costing a nickel. Those sort of things were because price levels were lower back then. So your purchasing power went further than it does today. So the really big idea when it comes to inflation and purchasing power is that only relative prices matter. What that means in general is that if every price in the economy changed the same, that doesn't really impact you. So if everything that you buy and the price of your labor all change the same amount, your purchasing power isn't affected. But if some prices change relative to others, so maybe only a few things cost more, or maybe everything has changed but some products have changed more than others, then the relative difference between them is a difference, and that's going to affect your purchasing power. So this is our big idea that only relative prices matter, and we're going to go through some math and kind of prove why this is true. So let's do a simplified example where you could only earn $20 a week maximum, and there's only two products that you want to spend your money on gas for your car or lattes. So if you decide that all you want to do is spend your money on gas this week, how much gas total could you buy if all your money is being spent on that? 10 gallons. And where I got that is you take the income, $20, and divide it by the price of gas, $2, and you can see how many gallons of gas you could get total. Go ahead and do the math for lattes, please. If all you want to do is buy lattes, how many can you get maximum? Okay, 5 cups. So we had $20 a week divided by $4 a cup, and that's where we got that 5. Now, this is kind of looking like a PPC, if you remember that. PPC is for production possibilities curve. Remember, it looked something like this. It was curved. And so we would have maybe gas on this side, and we would have lattes on this side. And that you could only do the maximum of each. So if all you're doing is buying gas, you're right there, which means all gas, no lattes. If all you want to do is buy lattes, you're right there, all lattes, no gas. And you could be at any point on the curve, but in order to buy one more latte, so in order to move this way along the curve, you have to give up gas to do so. That's the trade-off of the opportunity cost here. So if we're trying to figure out the opportunity cost of one latte, we want this number, this maximum amount, to become 1. So how do we do it? If we have this ratio of 10 gas, going as fast as I can with this cursor, to 5 cups, what do we do if we want to make it into 1 cup? You would divide both sides by 5. And 10 divided by 5 is 2. One more thing, opportunity cost has to have units. You have to show what you are giving up. The cost is in what? So for every 1 latte she decides to get, she gives up the opportunity to get 2 gallons of gasoline. So a little bit of review there about PPCs and opportunity costs. Now let's see what happens if there's a change in our economy. So we're starting off with the same situation, $20 a week in earnings, gas costs $2 per gallon, and lattes cost $4 a cup. Now here's the change. What happens if your income doubles and the price of gas and lattes double too? Do you think there's going to be an effect on your purchasing power, the amount that you can buy? Well, let's figure it out. So everything's going to double. So let's go ahead and make that work. So you're going to now earn, let's make that a little bit neater. There we go. You're going to now earn $40 per week. That doubled. Gas now costs $4 a gallon. And lattes now cost $8 a cup. All right, so the most gas you could buy. So if all you're doing is buying gas that week, what is the maximum amount you can get? 10 gallons, because we had the $40, the earnings, divided by $4, the price of gas. The most lattes you could buy. So if all you do is focus on lattes, the maximum amount is 5, because $40 divided by $8 for the cup. And then in order to buy one more latte, you have to give up how much? So if it was $5 5 cups, and we want that to turn into 1, you would divide both sides by 5, 2 gallons of gas. So compare that chart to the chart that you drew in your notes for when everything wasn't doubled. So has anything actually happened to your ability to purchase gas, your ability to purchase lattes, or the opportunity cost of doing so? No. Relative to your income, nothing real has changed. So everything might look like it costs twice as much, but you get paid twice as much too. So nothing has happened to your real wage. The value, the purchasing power of your real wage is exactly the same because all prices doubled. Remember, only relative price changes matter. If everything changes, there's going to be no real effect on your purchasing power. So here's our big rule. When prices go up or go down, they rise or lower, but wages do the same thing, then your real wage doesn't change. Your real wage is the wage divided by the price level. Remember, real, this word, always means we've adjusted for something. Real GDP, you adjusted for inflation. Real wages, we're adjusting for inflation. This is always taking a value and seeing what price level is going to do to that value. So if, let's say, everything gets divided by 3, so we have deflation where prices are falling. So now everything costs 1/3 less, but your wages also have gone down 1/3. Has the purchasing power changed? No, you can buy the same stuff you could before. Therefore, even though it looks like your wage is much smaller, that's your nominal wage, the non-adjusted one. Your real wage, where we adjusted for that change in price, didn't change at all because it buys the same amount because prices changed too. Let's see what happens if some prices change and others don't. So in this situation, the income is going to stay the same because usually in the economy, if you have inflation that's sudden, it's going to take wages a little bit to catch up. Wages are called a sticky price, which means that they are slow to change. Your boss isn't going to just give you a huge raise. So let's say the prices for gas and lattes double. That would make gas now $4 a gallon and lattes now $8 a gallon, but our wages didn't change. So how much gas maximum could this person now buy? 5 gallons. That was $20 divided by 4. So you can see that that's cut in half from above. If your income hasn't changed but prices double, you can buy half as much gas as you could before. Now how about lattes? How many lattes could she buy if that's all she buys? 2.5. That was from 20 divided by 8. And then finally, to buy one more latte, what's the opportunity cost of that latte? That's actually the same because if you divide gasoline by 2.5 to make this one become 1, that's how you got the 2. Now the reason that this value didn't change is both of those two things doubled, lattes and gas, the two things that you're measuring. So the ratios of the two have not been affected. So the cost, if you decide to not buy or to buy one more latte, is the same in relative value, but the maximum amount of both goods she can buy just got cut in half. So it's going to be a lot more painful for her to buy any of those things because everything costs a lot more than it did when her income has not gone up, but all the prices have. Bottom line, does inflation hurt that student? Yes. Her ability to buy any of those products has gone down because her real wage is now lower than the prices for any of these products. She can buy less gas and she can buy fewer lattes because of inflation. What happens to her purchasing power? It has gone down. When prices go up, purchasing power goes down. Each dollar that she gets in her paycheck only goes half as far when prices for those goods doubled and her price didn't. Now, Oftentimes people think that stores love high prices and consumers love low prices. Generally speaking, this is true, but with inflation, do you think it would also hurt someone who owned a gas station or a coffee shop? Would their sales go down? Yes. It's not so simple as saying that consumers hate inflation and stores love it. If gas costs you that much, do you think you might curtail how much you're driving? Decide not to go on a road trip? Maybe carpool with somebody? Yes. So even though their sales of that product, they're getting more for each gallon, they're probably selling fewer gallons. And as people make decisions to buy less and less and less of that product, it will hurt their sales in the long run. If you are selling lattes and you make $20 a week and a latte is $8, do you think people are going to buy lattes? Very unlikely. Very few people will. So if someone makes a lot of money and they can buy one expensive latte, great, but that coffee shop will probably not stay in business if their goods have become so expensive that they're now priced out for consumers. So inflation hurts both of the consumers and the producers in this case if inflation is happening much more rapidly than the increase in wages. Now we have the equation for measuring the inflation rate. We learned before an equation for measuring a percent change. We were using this to figure out the percent change in nominal GDPs and real GDPs, but inflation really is the percent that the price level changed or the price index changed. So we're going to use that same equation to figure out the inflation rate. So the price level in year 2 minus the price level in year 1 over the price level in year 1 times 100 will give us the inflation rate. That will be a percentage of how much the prices changed. If the prices went up, this should be a positive number. If the prices went down, this should be a negative number. When there is inflation in the economy, do you think people want to hold on to their money and spend it later, or spend their money now? What would you do if all the prices were going up quickly? They want to spend it now. They want to not hold on to their money. The idea is if things are costing more in the future, that means they're cheaper today. So shouldn't I buy it today before the price goes up? So when people realize that rising prices are going to lead to declines in their purchasing power, it makes them not want to hold on to any money. Because any money that you have sitting in that bank account, if prices double, isn't going to go very far. And you've hurt your purchasing power by holding on to the money instead of spending it when you could. Here are some costs in the economy of inflation. The first one is called shoe leather costs. This is kind of an old-fashioned idea for a name, but the concept makes sense. So if you realize that prices are going up, you're going to want to transfer your money. So the effort that you go to in order to transfer that money, that wastes your time, that wastes your money. So imagine before online banking, when you had to actually physically walk or drive, to one bank and then walk across the street to the next bank, you were burning shoe leather. That's this concept. So it actually is inefficient. It costs people time and money to transfer money. Maybe they have to do bank fees. So if they're converting their money into another currency or buying a stock or something like that, whatever it is that they're doing, this is taking a lot of productive time out of the economy. They're not working. They're not producing something for our GDP. So there's things you can do in inflation. Maybe you want to move your money into a higher interest rate. So earn something on that money that could otherwise be sitting in an account losing value. Or you can convert your dollar into a different currency that might have a more stable value. So any of those things, if you choose to do it, it benefits you, that's why you're doing it, but it's bad for society because all these people are wasting time doing these transactions, burning through their shoe leather, walking all over town, instead of actually producing things for our economy. Another cost to society is something called menu costs. And this is the concept. Imagine a restaurant, and they have a menu, and all the prices for their food is printed on the menu. Well, what if the prices went up 20% tomorrow and then 20% the next day? Could a restaurant stay in business without changing the prices on their menu? No, they don't have more than a 20% profit margin. So they're going to have to reprint menus tomorrow and reprint menus the next day, and that's the menu cost. It takes a lot of time and labor cost to do that. This price tag on the left, where it says HP touchpad $5.99, well, if every price went up, you're going to need a stock clerk to go to every single price tag and print a new label and stick that tag on. So instead of actually doing something productive for the store, every single day you're going to have to change prices if there's high inflation. In places with extreme inflation, they end up just getting rid of this whole price thing entirely, and there might be a chalkboard that says all prices times 5, or whatever it is to make the consumer do the math, because menu costs are so inefficient if you have to change menu prices on a daily basis. I hope you're beginning to see in econ that things are very rarely just good or just bad. We saw before that inflation can hurt consumers and producers, but there's another category in our economy, which is banks or lenders. So inflation often involves redistributing money. So not everybody is actually hurt. There are some people that are going to benefit and some people that are going to be worse off due to inflation. So the first major category is about loans. Loans have a set period of time. So when you agree to a loan, car loans tend to be 5 years, student loans are 15, home loans are 30. So these things are locked in. So let's say you get a 5-year loan with 5% interest. So that means at the end of that 5-year term, you have paid back that money plus 5% interest. But if inflation is higher, the inflation rate is 10%, that means that the money that you pay back to the bank is worth less than the money they gave you. Because remember, with high inflation, purchasing power goes down. So the money they gave you, you got to spend, you got to use when the purchasing power was greater. And then at the end of that 5 years, the money they got had a lower purchasing power. It had a lower value. So you're not going to give them the same exact dollar amount. So if it was a $100 loan, you're paying them back $105 no matter what. But that $105 buys a different amount of stuff if there's been inflation than if there hasn't been. So for that reason, borrowers benefit and lenders lose. So this is our big rule of the major categories. There's some other examples at the bottom, but these are the big things to keep in mind. That when inflation is more than we expected it to be, the borrowers benefit because they were able to use money that had a higher purchasing power than the money that they paid back the bank at the end. And the bank is the lenders in this case. Now, the really, really, really important part is that this was unanticipated inflation. Because do you think banks are stupid? Do they say, oh, there'll never be inflation? No, they realize that there will be some inflation. So they look at historical data. They look at maybe the last 5 years and see what the inflation rate has been. If the inflation rate has been 3% the past 5 years, they're probably going to put a 3% bump into the interest rate just to make up for that. So as long as, we expect inflation and inflation happens, then you don't have lenders lose, borrowers benefit. The issue is if the inflation is more than we anticipated. We thought it was going to be 3% inflation and it was actually 8% inflation. Well, that's unanticipated. That's more than we thought. That's more than the banks negotiated into that contract. And that's why lenders lose and borrowers benefit. Other groups of people that are hurt by unanticipated inflation. So we had lenders. Also, savers. Because if savers have money sitting in the bank and there's really high inflation, the purchasing power of the money they have in their savings account goes way down. So elderly people, people on a fixed income, meaning you have a set budget that you can only spend this much a month. Well, if prices are going up, 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 you can't keep up with all of that stuff. So they're going to be hurt by high inflation. Who likes high inflation? The borrowers do, because they're still paying back the same dollar amount that they have to at the end of the loan, but the value of that money is less. So they actually got to use the money for something more lucrative, more valuable than what they have to pay back to the bank. And also people that own things that gain value. So if you own land, if you own maybe oil deposits, if you own a resource like that, and as the price level in the economy goes up, that means the price, the value of your resource went up too. Your asset is now worth more. So because of that, they don't have to worry about their boss giving them a higher wage. They own something. The thing they owned went up in value because of that inflation. So there's some people that are better off and some people that are worse off if there's inflation. And remember, it has to be unanticipated or unexpected inflation. The lenders lose, borrowers benefit was true for unanticipated inflation. So what do you think will be true for deflation? Who is better off and who's worse off with deflation or the overall price level falling? That's going to be the opposite. So because deflation is the opposite of inflation, that means that the prices have fallen, so the purchasing power has gone up. If everything costs less, that dollar goes further. So if you're a borrower, the value of the money that you have to pay back the bank at the end would have bought so much more than what you had originally. So borrowers lose and lenders benefit because they're getting repaid money that has a much higher purchasing power than what they gave people at the beginning of the loan term. So let's talk more about interest rates now. Interest rates are important for figuring out lending and inflation and how far loans go. Banks are for profit. They're not there just to help you out if you're in trouble. They need to stay in business, and they're always going to charge you interest. There are compound interest and some more complicated things that we're not going to learn about at this point. They'll come later. So it's just simple interest. If a $100,000 loan has a 5% interest rate, how much interest are they paying? All that's asking is for you to find 5% of 100,000. Can you do that without a calculator? It's 5,000. And let me show you how. Multiples of 100 are always really, really simple. So take away the 1,000 part and look at just 100. What's 5% of 100? It's 5. Because percentages are already out of 100, so 17% of 100 is 17. 49% of 100 is 49. So see, once you have 100 and the number, it's just that, and then you give the zeros back, give those 3 zeros back. Simple enough. So that means a $100,000 loan with 5% interest, you would pay back the $100,000 plus the 5% interest. So at the end of the loan, you would owe $105,000. Before I give you the answer that goes on the notes, we're going to talk about why, in general, everybody needs to charge interest, including you. So you might have friends asking you to borrow money. You should charge them interest. I know that's crazy, but you're in econ now and you're learning why this is important. Now, you're probably not having a friend borrow money for a year, but let's just go with this example. So you lend a friend $100 and the term of the loan is 1 year. So why do you have to charge interest? The first reason is you are now foregoing the ability to use that $100. If he has the money, you don't. And what if you needed that money? What if you were in some sort of car accident and you need the money and now you have to put it on your credit card or something like that because you don't have access to the money? So you have provided a service. And remember, we always pay for goods and services in the economy. The service you have provided of loaning money is worth something in our economy, and it could potentially hurt you if you don't have it. Also, there is always some inflation. In America, the inflation rate is normally about 1 to 3%, but there's going to be something, which means that no matter what, the amount of money, if he gives you back that $100 at the end of the year, that $100 is worth less than the $100 you gave him a year previously, because inflation has occurred, which has reduced the purchasing power of that money. So if you charge no interest, you're actually losing the ability to use the money and losing money. So interest rates have to have inflation built in. You have to assume that there's going to be some and pack that into the interest rate. So here's what goes into the notes. Interest rate should have two parts. The first part is profit, that is paying the person, the lender, for the service that they provided. Banks are businesses, and they need to be paid for the service of lending money, or else how could they keep the lights on, pay their bills, pay their employees, etc. Also, you have to offset inflation. There's going to be inflation. So if you think inflation is going to be 3%, and you want to earn maybe 2% profit, then you add those two parts together and you would charge 5% interest. Banks and people should think the same way in terms of loans. We learned about the terms real and nominal with GDP. And real and nominal are going to be useful in many different economic terms throughout the year. So nominal is always the non-adjusted rate. Nominal rate is the one that is written on the bank wall. You go into a bank and it says car loans starting at 4%, home loans starting at 3%. That's the nominal interest rate. It's the published rate. It has not been adjusted for inflation. It's just the one that we give you there. The real interest rate, in order to make it real, we have to adjust for inflation. Figure out, okay, well, after inflation happened, what's the real value? So, because nominal is not adjusted, the inflation rate is going to be built in. We talked about how if you were a bank, you would want to assume, so if we assume there's going to be 2% inflation, then you're going to put that 2% in. It's part of the nominal rate. In order to get the real rate, you are subtracting inflation, removing the effect of inflation to see, well, how much did you actually pay in value? So let's get some practice problems here. If you borrowed $1,500 for 1 year at 6% interest, and during that year the inflation rate is 3%, what is the real interest rate? So here, nominal, oh, and by the way, nominal is always default because we haven't adjusted. You have to tell somebody if you're going to adjust the number. So you have to announce if it's the real GDP, the real interest rate. If it doesn't say what kind of interest, always nominal. So we know nominal interest is 6. Inflation is 3. 6 minus 3 is 3%. So the real interest rate, because there was some inflation, that means the value of the money that you're paying back is a little bit less. So the banks are charging 6% interest, but the real value of what they're getting back is 3%. That's what that means. If nominal interest rate for a loan was 5% and the inflation rate was 8%, who would benefit, lenders or borrowers? So first of all, let's convert this into the real rate. So nominal interest rate was 5, inflation is 8. 5 minus 8 equals -3. Do you think banks want to get paid back -3? No. So this is also unanticipated inflation. Do you think a bank would ever charge 5% if they expected inflation to be 8? No, that bank would go out of business. And we already learned that in unanticipated inflation, borrowers benefit. And here's a mathematical explanation of why borrowers benefit. In this case, the real interest rate is 3%. So that means that the value of the money the banks actually get paid back is negative 3%. It's gone down in value 3% from the money that they gave the borrower at the beginning of the loan. And the borrower was able to use that money. As inflation rate was going up, he or she was out there spending that money. So what they end up repaying the bank, because of that high inflation, has gone down in value, gone down 3%. So in essence, their cost of using it is the real interest rate, and their cost in this case is negative 3%. So they benefited. They paid nothing in terms of the real interest that they owed the bank, and the bank profited nothing. They lost money on that deal because what they got paid back, if they wanted to loan it out to somebody later, it's worth less than what they gave the person at the beginning. I hope this concept of how interest rates work and real versus nominal interest rates are starting to sink in at this point. Let's do some more practice with real and nominal interest rates. In this situation, your friend needs to borrow money from you, and so you're going to actually negotiate what the interest rate will be. So both of you expect inflation to be 5%. You don't actually know what the future will hold, but you have to make an estimate of what future inflation will be in order to decide the price of the loan. And for the cost of your services of lending the money, you're going to charge 3%. So that 5 plus 3 gives us 5%. So my question to you is, what is the nominal interest rate of the loan? Which number? Is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 8? Or is it a different one? The nominal interest rate is 8%. It is 8% because that is the listed price of the loan. You have locked that in. You have said that you're going to charge 8% based on those factors. Now, we don't actually know how much inflation will really happen, but we put that in and we hope that inflation is less than 8%. Otherwise, you're not going to profit at all. So let's see what happens. In scenario 1, you expected 5% inflation and you experienced only 1% inflation. So who is better off if inflation is less than you thought, less than you expected? The lender benefits. The lender gains. And here's why. There's some math that we need to see the reason why. So in order to see who's actually better off, you have to calculate the real interest rate. Okay, so in order to do the real interest rate, we got to get that equation. So real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus expected inflation. Sorry, in this case, minus actual inflation because we know what inflation was. So 8% nominal interest rate minus the inflation that actually occurred will give us the real interest rate of 7%. Now, we were expecting the real interest rate to be 3. Because we expected 8% nominal minus 5% inflation. But we were wrong. So you thought as a lender that you were going to get 3% profit, but you actually got 7% profit. So the lender benefits. They got paid back more than they thought they were going to get. Therefore, the borrower loses. They're paying a higher real interest rate than they expected. If they knew it was only going to be 1% inflation, they would have said, okay, you want 3% profit plus 1% inflation, then I only have to pay you 4%. But we didn't know what was going to happen, and you agreed to 8%. So the value of what they're paying back is different. Inflation was less than they thought. So the borrower lost. They paid more to the bank in value than they thought they were going to have to pay. So same terms for the loan as before. Our nominal interest rate is 8% because that's what we agreed upon. And our real interest rate, what did we think it was going to be at the beginning? We thought it would be nominal minus inflation equals real. So we expected the real interest rate to be 3%. So we expected 5% inflation, we experienced 5% inflation. So in order to figure out who gains and who benefits, we have to convert it to real. But neither one of us benefited. We thought real would be 3%, It is 3% because inflation was exactly what we agreed upon. So nobody benefits, nobody gains. It was what we thought it would be. We both broke even. You benefit 3% for your services. They paid you 3% for your services. Both of you were fine with that at the beginning, so nothing has changed. And our final scenario. You expected 5% inflation. By the end of the loan term, inflation was actually at 8%. So we have unexpected inflation, don't we? It's more than we thought. So we know borrower benefits, lenders lose, but let's see why. So the borrower benefits in unexpected inflation because, in this case, we expected the real interest rate to be 3%. Because we had 8% nominal interest and we expected 5% inflation. So we thought, okay, the borrower was going to have to pay back 3% in profits to the lender. But the real interest rate is actually 0% after we know what inflation is, because 8% nominal minus 8% inflation equals 0%. So the borrower had to pay back a smaller value of money than they expected to pay. 3% less because they thought they'd pay back 3% in profit, and they ended up paying back 0% because the value of the money had gone down when inflation went up. So if borrower benefits, who loses? The lender. 0% means real interest rate, means 0% profit. They thought they were getting a 3% profit because that's what they thought the real interest rate would be. But once we actually saw what truly happened with inflation, they're going to get their money back, but they will have gained no profit. All of that money would have been wiped away by the diminishing purchasing power due to the higher inflation. So how do we stop inflation if it's out of control or going too fast? In the business cycle, I hope you recall that it's, going up and down like so. As it's rising, we're having inflation. If you want to stop inflation, you have to create a recession, a downturn. So when you stop inflation, you're actually depressing the economy. You are making unemployment go way up in order to bring inflation down. You have one or the other. When the business cycle is going up, you have inflation. When it's going down, you have unemployment. You got to pick which one you want. So how does this work? Governments remove money from circulation. So if prices are going higher, they can take money out of circulation. So people are able to buy fewer things. And if purchasing goes down, stores are going to lay off employees. Unemployment's going to go up, and that will begin to slow down inflation. So you can see in this table, purple is inflation. So inflation was peaking. In order to make inflation go down, unemployment peaked before they both started to settle. So it's actually very painful for an economy to get out of inflation. So the hope is that it never gets high. As long as we have stable and slow rates of inflation, that's okay. 1%, 2%, not a problem. If everything costs you 2% more next year, you're probably going to be okay. It's major levels of inflation that we have to worry about, that you have to do this sort of government intervention to stop. So let's go ahead as we finish Module 14 and look at the 3 types of price changes, because they can be often confusing for people. Inflation is very simple. Inflation is when the overall price level goes up. Deflation is when the overall price level goes down. Disinflation can be confusing. Disinflation is slowing down the rate of inflation. So if your inflation rate has been 3% every year, prices are going up 3% this year, they're going up 3% next year, and now we're going to lower the rate of inflation. So now prices are going up 1% this year, going up 1% the next year. So prices are still going up in disinflation. Inflation still exists. In deflation, prices are going down. In disinflation, they're going up, but they're going up less than they were last year. So let's say you have a 14% inflation rate. and now you have a 10% inflation rate. That's an example of disinflation, not deflation, because prices are still going up 10% every year, but that's less than they used to be going up. That's why it's considered disinflation. Deflation would be if prices went down 2% this year compared to last year.